Aha, it's Lil Baby.
On me, Ihram? Yeah? Amazing. Welcome to episode 36 of Conversations with Chai. I'm your host, Ihram Chowdhury, aka Lil Baby Ram. And today I have with me sexual health expert, columnist, writer for Allure mag, Dr. Varuna Srinivasan. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you. Thank you for having me on your podcast.
No, absolutely. Thank you for doing this. I thought what you did specifically as a South Asian, specifically as a South Asian woman, was so cool. Like, I had never seen a sex expert from our community, so I was like, oh, we need to have this conversation. Like, It's like I think it's like something that's so important to every society.
Yeah.
But it's like one that it's a topic thing that we just don't ever talk about.
Yeah, we don't want to talk about it. I'll definitely say that my community is much smaller than I anticipated, like especially we're talking about like South Asians specifically, which is how I literally started, my education on Instagram was like targeting South Asians in 2020. Because it's just like, we don't talk. Even today I had a call with someone and they were like, oh my God, you're a Desi and you're talking about sex. And I'm like, it's 2024. Like, we're all having sex. Like, do you know that India is one of the most like populated countries on the planet? How do you think babies are made? Like, and it's interesting that we don't have those conversations. We don't want to have those conversations. So I think it was just really exciting because I love the work that I do. And it's also just so amazing to meet other people in the community that are very much just like, oh my God, I need this. I need to know this. It's really good to have this kind of representation.
I think it's like such like a disservice that we don't talk about it from both aspects. A lot of it is obviously like cultural.
Yeah.
A lot of it is culturally mixed with like religion.
Yeah.
But I think it's like such a disservice because then we're so unequipped to have those conversations like as adults. Like I like realize that like about myself.
Yeah.
I'm like, even with like partners, I'm like, damn, like we can't even really, outside of like the action of it.
Yeah.
We can't even really talk about it until like, I would say like I developed that like much later in life.
Yes.
And it's because like probably like they're outside of like the little bit of sex ed that they do in school.
Yeah.
Like that's it.
You had sex ed in school. I didn't even have that.
We had it in like 5th grade. It was basically like, this is a penis.
And this is a vagina.
And girls have periods and that was about it.
Oh my God.
But I like think like all of the stuff in between that's so important is like so like swept to the side. Like I saw one of your articles about like sexual libido.
Yeah.
And how it comes in like waves.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's like something that's always been an anxiety point for me. And it's like something I could never actually like verbalize and talk about.
Yes. Oh my God. I get that. I literally just read an article today because I was writing another article for Cosmo, and there are so many studies now that are looking at like libido. And of course, the outdated, really gendered idea is that men are always turned on, or that men can like turn on their like their sexuality or want to have sex immediately, right? And that women have this idea, and really talking in like a binary sense, like that women are like on and off, they're hot and cold, like they struggle with their libido. But it's showing that there isn't much fluctuation at all, and there are varying factors. But you're right, I think that we tend to put the sexes in like a box and we tend to like extrapolate, right? And so like men are thought of being extremely like hypersexual and women are like desexualized almost, like in certain aspects. And I mean that as in like society does hypersexualize women and profit off women's bodies. But what I mean by desexualized is that when we think about like a woman's sexuality or sexuality in that context, it's really like misunderstood or not even understood at all.
I would say it's almost demonized. Like it's definitely like it's hypersexualized when we want it to be and when it fits our narratives. But when a woman, I've noticed that like with like friends, like that are like more sensual.
Yeah.
Like they're like looked at a certain way.
Oh my God.
Like, oh, like she's like a little too out there, right? Just because.
Yes.
But by the same measure, I have like friends who are like openly talking about like things that they've like done like sexually, and it's like nobody ever like bats an eye.
No.
Right? But like a lot of my girlfriends like in certain environments can't talk about that because of how they would be like perceived. Did that study say that it wasn't gender correlated?
Yeah, it didn't really say that, it said that we need to get rid of those ideologies or this idea that like a man's libido doesn't fluctuate or a woman's libido is always fluctuating, right? And we're entering this like new age where we're post-pandemic. There's like new levels of stress that we're experiencing. And just the way that we think about, there was another study that showed that Gen Z is actually having less sex, like as a whole. It's just like not even wanting to have sex.
Stress induced.
Possibly, or just the fact that they're so they're so technology like focused, and that's like a big part of their lives. I mean, it's really, I think, hard to extrapolate again, like how specific. I think this is just such an under-researched area, right? Like we spend so much of money understanding a man's sexuality, but not enough for women. Like we have pills for erectile dysfunction, we have pills for like male libido, but we don't have any of that for like women. And so part of my Allure column, I think it's heartbreaking for me when I interview all of these women. And when it comes to libido, it's like they really feel like something's wrong with their body and their body is like broken. But it's just the fact that
Because of lower libido?
because of the low libido that they're facing. But it's just the fact that the doctors aren't like counseling them, because the doctors don't have education on this, because they're not really taught about like female dysfunction or like anorgasmia or like difficulties getting aroused. And so there's under-researched, it's underfunded, like the doctors aren't really like educated on it. And then most of the times, like that's why I think like most of them come to Instagram and then follow these sexuality educators, because they're finding that community. They're finally finding like, oh, okay, I'm not alone in this. Like I'm having intimacy issues. I'm having like sex issues, and I can't really go to my doctor. I can't really go to my family. And someone made an interesting comment today. I think a couple of days ago, I was talking to my friend, and she said, you know, women, I noticed that we don't talk about money, and sometimes we don't talk as much about sex. So we like tend to have conversations about dating and stuff, but we don't really like go into the nitty gritty. Like, oh, I'm having a difficulty like orgasming. What do you guys do? Like we don't have those deep conversations. And so we're like on the internet looking, and there's some amount of like guilt and shame that's attached to it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Because I talk about it with like my friends, like my partners, and I'm like, some of them will have that issue, right? Like, it's like, yo, like, I'm not orgasming, right? And that's like a whole other conversation about like the imbalance of like orgasms between men and women.
The orgasm gap is large, yes.
Like large, right? Because I'm here like, yo, like you guys aren't saying anything, and therefore like you're never going to hit that.
Yeah.
So then it leads to a thing of like true frustration, right? Like, because a lot of those things like are, because it's under-researched, underfunded, a lot of the things that we know about sex are purely anecdotal.
Exactly. Yes.
Like it's purely anecdotal, right? For example, on the topic of like libido, right? So many, like we hear so many stories of like, oh, like with all of my other partners, I was never like sexually aroused. But then with this one partner that made me feel safe and made me feel secure, I was able to orgasm. I was able to, I wanted to have sex a bunch of times, right? And it's like, oh, like you're not a sexually like vacant person.
No, you just didn't find the right person to have sex with.
But that we know anecdotally.
Yeah.
But there's definitely science to it as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it also like depends on your like sexual. It depends on so many different factors. Again, I don't like to think of libido as like this like on and off switch. I think it's just so dependent on a myriad of factors. And this is also what I often say is like, not all of us need to be having sex all the time. And I know that this sounds like I talk about sex a lot, but I also want to encourage people not to have sex. Like, I think we as a society sometimes force ourselves to have sex, especially women are often feeling like they aren't meeting their partner's needs or their husband's needs, or they feel like a bad wife or a bad girlfriend, especially when their male partner is consistently like making a move and they're like not interested and they feel bad about it. But it's also like, you can be with someone and be like deeply emotionally and intimate with them and not have sex at all. And that's something that I also really want to encourage people to think about is like, you don't need to be having sex all the time. Like a healthy sex life doesn't mean that you're just having sex or you're like fucking like bunnies, you know, like every single week after week. It means that you're connecting with that person and you've really understood your body, your boundaries, and like what works for you.
But you don't think that your libido matching your partner's is an important part of a healthy relationship? Because I can understand like why that would be like a concern, right? Like if somebody does want to have sex, and like, you know, like we said, like obviously like it's not always men, right? Like sometimes it is women, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's a large gap in that, it could, I would think, would cause like an issue one way or the other, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Because somebody is feeling like underwhelmed in the frequency of sex, right? Because I think like a lot of those, and it really does depend on, and that's why like the conversation piece is so much more, I think, important.
Yeah.
Is that like we just need to talk about it, because each individual person
Yeah.
is so different in their sexual libido,
Yeah.
and like how they want to have sex, and the
Correct.
frequency that they want to have sex.
Exactly. I mean, it's like when you enter a conversation, when you enter a relationship, you're having conversations, right? You're having conversations about money. So like, how do you spend money? Like, how do you save money? Like, what is your relationship with money? Or like when you talk about kids, like what do you want to have kids? I think having a conversation about sex is so important, and like sexual compatibility is so important. Like I find that the people that I've spoken to for my Allure column will say, I have reached a point in my life where I don't really find the need to have penetrative vaginal sex, and I have found a partner that's okay with that. And so then we explore other intimate acts, right? And so you're right. I think like then if you meet someone and you don't have that compatibility, it's not going to work. Like, honestly, it's kind of like the same. It's a deal breaker, right? Like if you want kids and I don't want kids, that's a deal breaker. If you want to like engage in sex a lot more than what I'm prepared for, and I'm not going to like yield my body to that, we are not a match. And what ends up happening is those relationships exist and one partner gives in a lot more than they want to. And so they end up feeling really disconnected from their bodies. And this is really common for like a lot of brown women. I've noticed is like they feel that they have to be in service of. And so if they have a partner with a higher libido than them, and like women have so many other stressors, and we have hormones, like every month we're kind of always going through this like hormonal fluctuation, and it's never going to be like consistently leveled, right? And so we often yield, or we often say yes to sex when we want to say no. And that just ends up becoming like the cycle. And so, yes, I think sexual compatibility is just so important. And that's something that everyone should think about is like, hey, are we in sync? Like what's happening right now?
I think back to like the shame of it in our culture, right?
Yeah.
Is that like you can't even talk about it within your relationship.
No.
Which causes a whole issue, right? Like,
Yeah.
Because like I don't know how it would be received if a friend of mine came to me and said, yeah, I broke up with this person, or I'm not going to see this person because they don't match my sexual needs, right?
Yeah.
Like, as guys, like we probably say it we don't say it in those words, but we say it, right?
Yeah.
With our actions, we say it in different ways.
Yeah.
But that is, I think, a powerful thing to understand about your own self, right?
Yeah.
If that's how you value sex in your life.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you're somebody who doesn't indifferent towards it.
Yeah.
But that in itself is also not a true conversation starter, right?
It's not. I mean, also, like, I will say that, we're talking about like brown women, but I have found, like, in conversations with my brother and other men in my life, men are often taught from a young age to be like really sexual. Like that comes with being a man. Like you need to have an erection, you need to be like have this big body, and you need to be like having sex with as many chicks as you can. Like that's your college experience, right? And so if you're not going to bars and hitting on women and taking someone home, then you're like less of a man. And so we've created this idea of like, again, like toxic masculinity. I think everyone kind of knows that term. But even men, I find that they feel like they should be having sex just because they are erect. You know what I mean? Like, it's almost as if like your body has this stimuli and then your mind catches up. But it's almost as if like, oh, I should be having sex, so I'm going to be having sex. Because that's the only way that I can get rid of this erection. Or I just have to do what I'm supposed to be doing. And so there's also a disconnect there. And then there's also this toxic narrative that a lot of brown guys have where, they say, oh, you turned me on, you might as well just like finish what we started. Or like they shame women for saying, oh, she didn't put out. Or like she was a tease and she didn't put out. And so like there are like these really disconnected narratives. I think as a society, especially like coming from India, I feel like that's something that I experienced a lot is like women live in shame and are often taught to be in service to men. And men are also like really disconnected from their bodies because they're only taught to like have sex as much as they should. And then like they have these like really toxic ideas about women. And all of that is just like, it's just one big fucking mess, honestly.
It's a mess. And it's honestly
It's a mess.
I actually think it's like terrible. I feel really bad for those people.
Yeah.
Because it's like you actually don't get to truly enjoy
You
the type of. You
don't.
think that because you're having a lot of sex or you're having sex with a bunch of women that you're like really experiencing sex.
It's
but like
not.
you haven't felt what
No.
it's like to have like real sex.
Thank you. Like literally half, I think most men are only taught like jackhammer. Like jackhammer, and then you come, and then that's it. And then it's like you're not really connecting with your partner. Like most men often masturbate in shame because they, and like a lot of brown men I find in my comments are like, when I talk about masturbation, they're like, oh, this is bad. This is shameful. And I think it's like harder. I get a lot of comments from people who are from like Muslim countries, so like Pakistan and Bangladesh, that are like, it's against my religion. But they are still masturbating because it's so natural to who you are. And so they're masturbating in shame. And so then they aren't like moaning in bed. They aren't able to communicate with their partner in bed, right? It's just that this one action, I have to like vaginally penetrate someone and then I have to come and then that's it. So you're so right, like in saying that you are having sex, but you're not having sex.
I really don't think that transparently, I don't even think I had like real sex up until like my like mid to late 20s.
Which is when sex gets good, because literally you're not even taught how to have sex. You're just fumbling through it.
No, but that's what 100%, Doc. Like I think about like, yo, like again, like I'm like, yo, throughout my like late teens, right? Like college, I'm just like, wow, I really wasn't having sex.
You're not,
like
no.
I was coming, right? But I wasn't having sex. Like,
I know.
like it's like so bad. I joke around. And I'm just like, oh yeah, like I haven't like really had sex, right? And they're like, that's a lie, right? And I'm just like, no. Like I really
haven't had sex. Yeah.
Like it's like such like a weird thing because I'm like, damn, like even the things that I know now that I need to have like real sex.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I really wasn't getting those through like a random like one night stand, right? Like
No.
I realized this about myself like more recently. I was like, oh, I actually, for me to be like in present, I need to actually feel safe.
Yes.
Like I need to feel like, oh, like no matter how this goes,
yes.
right? That like will be good regardless, right?
Yes.
And I don't know if there probably is science behind it.
Yeah.
But then I've noticed that with that like level of trust, then the sex got better. Like when I was thinking about like, yo, how long am I going to last?
Yeah.
I actually probably lasted like a lot less.
Wow.
Like, oh, like when I was stressed about it, right?
Yes.
But with like partners that I've like truly had like true trust and like relationship with.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, like I perform better.
I think that's honestly, I think that you're not alone in saying that. I think that's the case even for me. I feel like when I was looking back at the sex that I was having, it was coming from a point of shame. It was coming from a point of like, you know, when you have a negative relationship with sex, I think a lot of us have, at some point have had a really negative relationship with sex where we're like either masturbating in shame or like you're taught, you think like body count is a big thing. Oh, I've already had sex with like 5 people this year. If I have more sex, then I'm a bad person. Or I don't want to be in a relationship. I just want to have sex with multiple people. And so, but if it comes from a point of like shame where you're like self-deprecating or self-sabotage or you're, you know, trying to get over something, I think that kind of like, it really puts you in a bad space then, right? And I think we've all kind of been in it. But when you actually start listening to your body and you're actually like, no, I want to say no right now, so I'm going to say no. It's okay if I disappoint my partner. Or like what you said, like, I want to feel safe. Like, I need that emotional connection. I need to know that we both are like in this together, that you're not just going to like fuck me over and you're going to leave. And that does help you perform better because then what you guys are experiencing together, you know, whoever 1 or 2 or 3 partners, you're really like actually having sex, like you're understanding. And I think that's when we use the word sex, it's such a negative connotation to it. And it's like, we just think of like fucking and it's like all of these negative kind of ideas around it. But it's like literally what you just said. It can be this amazing, beautiful, intimate thing. And you learn so much about yourself, about your body, because it's literally the most intimate thing that you can ever do in your entire life.
And I think, but what I think is like a major cause of that is because we're not having the conversation with our community or each other, right? We have to then get sexual opinions and sexual, like what our ideas of sex are more so influenced by the internet that like doesn't truly understand what sex is.
No.
and B, probably porn.
Porn is, I can't even, I like, yeah.
Like those two things, like for young men,
It's very deprecating.
is
Yeah.
probably what is causing a lot of these like sexual opinions that I see on the internet.
No,
Like when I see something,
100%.
I'm like, oh, y'all really haven't had sex.
No, they haven't. And they're like, I think that's part of it, right? It's a vicious cycle where they aren't getting the education that they need and they aren't having the safe spaces again, where if they are having sex, they're probably having someone shaming them or they're probably feeling embarrassed about their body. Because let's be honest, a lot of men have like body issues too. They have body image issues. They have a lot of like questions about their penis. They're very insecure about size, shape, girth. Like, am I like fitting the ideal body type of a man, like a man? And then they go to the internet, they join these communities, and then they have these like vicious ideas, or they like learn these like vicious ideas about like what it's like to have sex and treat women. And then it's just like this endless loop where the men who are often like perpetrating this violence are like coming from such a like insecure, like they don't like themselves, like they aren't even connected to themselves, right? And so every now and then I will go on Pornhub. And I will look at the titles and I will like look at how they describe women. And they often, almost all of them will say, lucky guy gets to sleep with 5 women. But then on the other side, it'll be like, whore gets like come on by 5 lucky men.
Yeah.
And like consistently the narrative is that women who have sex are like really like lustful and should be degraded and should be treated a specific way just because they're exploring their sexuality. And men can always explore their sexuality. Like men should always be exploring their sexuality. But what I also find really sad is the fact that men are reduced to their penis. I don't know if that makes sense to you. Like I feel like especially in porn videos, it's like when you look at all of those porn categories, it's like stepmother or stepsister, which I guess is so incestuous, but also like, you know, there are many other fantasies and it's like you never see it from like an emotional point of view where a man is kind of coming in and he has like talking to the person. And I think that's where like Belisa and all those other types of like new age porn companies are coming up, where they're like building this narrative where they're trying to make men feel like more than just their penis and just like you're like a fuck machine, or like that's your only job is to like have sex as much as possible. And that's what I think it's like. It really does break my heart sometimes when I look at some of these like, you know, like captions or titles on Pornhub, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. It just like when I think about it, it's just like really upsetting to me.
It's like terrible because like those people like you, if you get lucky, you get to meet a partner who makes you feel and understand sex at that level. But for a majority of these people, they end up being trapped by that vicious cycle that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because of those beliefs and thinking,
yeah,
they actually never get to experience real sex. They never get to experience real intimacy.
They don't. Yeah, I think intimacy is such a big issue, right? Like, I think that's why we have such a loneliness epidemic in men, or like, you know, the high suicide rates is because you are never taught to like connect with yourself. And there's no like brotherhood. I mean, again, this is something that I talk about a lot with my brother, in that I think women have a lot of community and friendships, right? So from a young age, we like have our girlfriends, and so we go for sleepovers. I think for men, the kind of community that they are finding, especially as it relates to relationships and sex and emotional, is like these communities on Reddit, which are incredibly toxic, right? And so that's how you have the incel community. And then you have a bunch of guys who are like, do experience the heartbreak, right? Mm-hmm. So if you experience a heartbreak, like, I don't know how many men have like a shoulder to cry on or go talk to a friend about. It ends up going to like Andrew Tate or this guy or that guy. And those are the communities that men have. And they're so rooted around hating women or like being a man. And that being a man equates hating women and exerting violence onto women and then just like fucking as many women as possible.
And I think what you're describing, even though we talked about how we're not talking about sex enough, I think that women, right?
Yeah.
Have those conversations about their sex lives.
Yeah.
If it's lacking with other women,
yeah,
with their sisterhood,
yeah,
much more than men are. Like,
yeah,
as a man, like, it's crazy. We had me and my like 3 friends like came back drunk one like recently.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation about like most of us are like cuffed up, like seeing people, right?
Yeah.
So we had like a very open conversation about sex. But I was just like, damn, this would not have been possible like 5 years ago. But I'm like, it's important that it is, because some of the questions that are being asked, I'm like, oh, I actually know the answer to that, or I know what you could do.
Yeah.
But if you hadn't asked me, your brother, you probably would have just Googled some shit on the internet, or you would have just gone to Pornhub and be like, yo, let's see what they're doing. But what they're doing is not reflective of how true sex and how real sex is being had.
Exactly. Oh my God. Nail on the head. Like we aren't having, especially like I think we aren't having enough conversations, but men especially, right? Because when I talk to people or I talk to men, I find that they are really vulnerable with me because it's a safe space, right? Because there's zero judgment. But I think it's tough when you have a bunch of like friends and you're kind of like, oh, I kissed a dude. And then that, you don't know how it's going to come across. So you're like, I think I find that guy attractive. And it's like, but you need space to experience that, to feel like you can actually like tell your friend. Like I've told so many of my girlfriends, oh my God, yeah, I kissed that girl. She's so hot. And they'd like tease me about it. But that's the extent of it. And maybe I would get some shame here and there. But I think with men, it's so much more violent, right? Like if it's so homophobic, that
It's homophobic,
like,
and it's a lot of, I would say with like men, it's a lot of like our egos at play, right?
Yeah.
As a man, like, this is like something like I've now talking to my friends, I'm like, oh, like we've all experienced this. Like for something as simple as like not being able to perform for whatever reason, like whiskey dick, right? That's like a whiskey dick situation. That's like something that probably, I would say 100 men, 99 of them have probably faced that in their lives if they drink.
Yeah.
Right?
It's so common.
But you never hear that part and somebody saying like, yo, that happened. And like, yo, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, because, and I get it. Like, I've definitely been in that shoe too, where it's like, oh, I don't want to say that. Like, oh, like, why didn't you and that girl hook up? Like, you took her home. It's like, oh, like, damn, I like, couldn't get there, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like an ego thing. It's like, oh, I couldn't get there. Like, what does that mean about me and like my like, value as a man? Like, oh, I couldn't get there, right?
Exactly.
But it's like, oh, like this is something that we're all experiencing, and then once we all accept that it happens, it's a lot more like liberating in that sense.
It's so liberating, literally, to have like you often talk so much about like, oh yeah, I took that chick home and like we had sex and then I came like 5 times, but we never say, man, I really struggled to get an erection the other day. Like it was fucking hard, or like, does your penis bend to the side? Like we are not having those intimate conversations because it's quote unquote embarrassing. And you're right, like you're going on the internet and you're trying to find these answers, and then you're just finding a really shitty like sex coach or dating coach for men who is like not giving you the advice that you need, because you need to be intimate, you need to be vulnerable to actually like get in touch with yourself. And I just don't think that's a liberty that many men are given.
I have like a dickhead comment, but I really think a lot of men are having sex for other men. Like, to explain what that means is like,
yes, oh my God, yes.
Like, I think a lot of men are having sex. I'm like, you're not even having good sex.
No.
You're not even really enjoying yourself like you could be.
And you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it to show off.
You're doing it just so you can tell me next week, that I took homegirl home last night.
Like,
and
no
I'm all
one
like,
cares.
you don't need, like, I know that, like, because I hear that, like, you know, when I was like outside, I'm all like, yo, like, oh yeah, like I hooked up with this guy, and none of them were good. And I'm like, oh, like they're just so concerned that they could say, oh, I had sex with her, more so than the fact, like, because they're in their heads, it's like, oh, I already got to have sex with her.
Yeah.
And I can forever say I had sex with her.
Oh my God.
But it's like, yo, like you didn't even make her come. You didn't even like.
Sounds like she fucked you.
Yeah,
you
like,
didn't fuck her.
But we don't say that enough, right? Because I think like women are so protective of men in that sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like we never hear that the other way.
Yeah.
Right? Like men have, back to like it being a cultural phenomenon, right? Men have no problem saying like, yo, that girl sucked at sex.
Yeah.
But because women, nurturing, however you want to describe it, are protective of men in that sense, right? Like I've never heard one of my like homegirls ever say like, bro, like small dick, or oh bro, didn't fuck me.
She's probably
well.
telling her girlfriends. Like the amount of times that I have literally told my girlfriends, I'm like, oh my God, that guy is the worst. Like I had like, and we're telling our girlfriends that guy took me home and he didn't even have like a bed sheet on and he wanted to have sex on a bare mattress. And I was like, I'm not going to fuck you on a bare mattress. What the fuck is wrong with you?
But then that goes into a larger discussion of men not having enough real friends that are women.
No, or like even, yeah, exactly. I hate this idea, especially like in mainstream movies, like when Harry Met Sally, where they're like, men and women can never be friends. And it's like, well, you're literally taught from a young age then that women are like people that you have sex with and you date. They're not taught that you can't have like friendships with them. Like, and I also, so my husband has a lot of close female friends and I love that for him. Like my brother has a lot of close female friends. For me, that's such a green flag. Like if you are a man and you have close female friendships and you treat them like sisters and they treat you like brothers and it's completely platonic, that is, again, not something that a lot of men are taught. They're taught that if you have a friend and she's being nice to you, she's flirting with you and she wants to fuck you. And if she doesn't fuck you, then she's a tease. And it's like men, again, aren't really taught to have female friendships. And the male friendships that they have are also shitty. They're just like egging each other on to have sex as much as possible. And it's so self-deprecating.
I think it's like such a disservice to like friend groups, individual friendships. Because I'm like, you don't even get the other element of having a woman there in a non-sexual light. Right? Outside of our girlfriends, outside of like, it's so, I always say like, it's so fly. Like when my friends that are women are able to add perspective to a generic conversation.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Because like, it's like, we're trying to talk about this generally, but we only have one side of the equation. And we have the side of the equation that like, we already know about ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? But we don't have like, like, how is it from that end? Like, I won't lie. Like most of my things, like if I have like a relationship issue, like do I go to my guy friends? Yeah. But 9 out of 10 times, just to check if I'm not crazy, I go to my group chat with my girl, like Rad and my friend Ange. I'm all like, yo, am I crazy here, right? Or is this wrong of me? And 9 out of 10 times, they're probably like, yeah, you in the wrong. And like looking at it back, I'm like, oh, damn, I was in the wrong, right?
Yeah.
It's like, bro, like, why are you tripping about that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, like we as a society are missing out on that because that's like a projection that we also put onto others.
Yeah.
Outside of us being told like, yo, you can't have a platonic friendship with a woman.
Yeah.
Other people put that on you. Like I heard that a lot because I have like most of my closest friends are like women, right?
Yeah.
And I've gotten because of my sexual history, everyone's just putting that on my jacket, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, like they can't really be friends or there has to be something there. It's like, no, like those are really my friends. Like that's like my sister for real.
But again, they're reducing you to your penis. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like we're not looking at men as emotional beings. Again, we're just looking at them as like you are just a penis and your only job is to like squirt sperm at someone. And that's it. And it's like, no, but you are literally like such a multidimensional being and you deserve to experience your sexuality, have emotional and platonic friendships, not just sex. And you can not have sex at all. Like I think that so many men just struggle with that aspect of it is like, especially when it comes to libido or not feeling up to the task. It's like, if you don't want to have sex, that doesn't make you any less of a man.
I think like, and that's like, even like on that, like when we talked about like intimacy, like people kind of misconstrued the fact that like intimacy is just this one dimensional thing that you have with somebody you're having sex with, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes like as men, like a lot of those men probably just want to hug.
They want to hug. Yes, they do. And I hate the internet sometimes because you'll see a man who's really in touch with himself and the comments will be like, he's gay. He's gay. He's a gay man. And I'm like, well, because he has feelings. Like because he has feelings.
I see that around like New York, like culturally, like a lot too.
Yeah.
Like if a guy does have friends that are women, like, I'm super like I'm like a physical like touch person even with like my friends, but we have like that type of rapport and relationship that nobody ever looks at us like sideways because of that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm hugging my friends, whether guy, girl, whatever, it doesn't matter to me, right? But I know that, and again, like people know like my history, so they don't put that on my jacket. But I've seen that in other circles, where it's like because a guy is like that, they just put on the fact that he's either fucking them, or he's gay,
and it's like, what kind of like dichotomy is that? And it's just so like, I think that's why it's just like men are also upholding this patriarchy, and then you're also victims of it. That's why we're like feminism benefits everyone, right? Or this idea of being sex positive benefits everybody, because it isn't just that. Because most men on the internet get really mad at me because they're thinking that I'm encouraging women to be quote unquote loose or to explore their sexuality. But what I'm really saying is like, everybody being sexually liberated for anyone, regardless of gender, doesn't mean that you are having sex all the time with multiple people. What it means is that you are in touch with yourself, you know your own boundaries, you know what works for you and what doesn't, and you're honoring your needs, right? And you're not reducing yourself to a penis or a vagina or your like gender or anything. You're just like, this is my body. This is what I want to do with it. This is what I'm comfortable with. And we're still not there yet as a society. And I feel, especially in India, like I get so many like comments from men, and I just think, I'm like, you are misunderstanding what feminism is. You're misunderstanding what it means to be sex positive. And in the end, it's only going to benefit you guys.
I think it's like part of it is like the messengers, right?
Yeah.
I think that like, unfortunately, of like how the internet is like,
Yeah.
the men that are having sex the right way, or
Yeah.
the
The
that
way
are moving
that
around,
they should be having it. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
they're just like, this isn't worth my time to lead people like towards the thing, right? So then you get like cultural figures that are only taking advantage of this like community that truly just needs guidance.
Yeah.
A lot of those like I think a lot of those issues would have and could have been solved had those people, especially brown men, had real father figures. Now, I say that like, I'm not saying that brown dads are not great fathers, but I think that there's a huge lack of that type of conversation.
Yes, 100%.
Right? Like we actually never learned, and obviously like our moms just culturally aren't talking about sex with us as men. Right? Like I would say that like moms are probably talking about those things a lot more so with their daughters.
Yeah.
But like, first of all, brown dads can't talk about anything. So much less to try to get them to the table to come and talk about sex.
Yeah.
It's just not happening, right?
Yeah.
And then you're led astray because then you're like looking truly just for guidance.
You are. And it's like men are given so much free reign. Like, I'll give an example. So I went to med school in India, and the girls' hostel had a very strict like curfew at 10. I'm telling you, it was really strict. Like they had 2 security guards, and that you have to sign in. You had no guests. But the guys' hostel, no curfew, no security guards. You can kind of fuck around and find out and do whatever the hell you want. And you're right. It's like they aren't, I mean, it's 2 spectrums, right? We're like completely like protecting women and caging them, and there's like the vigilantism around women. But for men, it's like there's no structure, there's no guidance, there's no support. They're kind of just going out there and figuring it out, and they are failing multiple times, and they're hurting themselves. They're not able to figure any of it out, right? Because you're right, there's no kind of like male father figure that's really telling them that like, hey, don't treat women that way, or like, you know, like, do you have any questions about sex? Like, are you using protection? Like, those conversations don't even exist. Not that they exist for women and their mothers, but I feel like almost like women are just so caged, and like many of us don't even experience what sex is until like marriage. But for boys, it's just so like, it's just so like
you're
all
just left
over
to
the
your
place.
own devices.
Literally,
Like,
you're figuring it out.
the only conversation I've ever had with like my parents revolving like the other gender is, don't talk to them until you're married. That's not helpful, mom and dad.
That's literally not helpful at all.
I'm me, and I'm gonna be outside, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna be outside. So
Yeah.
like, but you're like, now instead of prepping me for being outside and operating around in a productive manner or in a manner that's safe to me, I'm just left to go figure it out. At 17, do I really have the wherewithal to know how to operate in those situations?
No.
No.
Not at all. And this is the thing, like sex education is about harm reduction. Like sex education is telling you that at some point you are going to experiment. You are going to learn about your body, like it's growing. And sexual arousal is so like it's so science based, like it's inherent to who you are. You are going to feel turned on. You are going to experience desire. And what sex education does, or any type of like conversation about contraception or consent or boundaries, is like harm reduction. It's teaching you to act safely, to experience sex safely, right? So that you're not going out there and you're having sex with someone and then it ends up in pregnancy, or you're getting an STI, or you end up like experiencing a heartbreak, or like you want to, find out if you're queer, or like, you're attracted to someone of the same sex. Like, but they don't have those tools, right? Like it's so, again, like one dimensional. You're kind of trying to figure it out, and then you just end up getting hurt, and then you get sucked into that vicious cycle again, which is like toxic masculinity, self-hating, self-deprecating, and then just keeps on going on. And you don't break that generational curse either, which is something that my brother and I talk about a lot. Is like, when we have kids, we're going to be so, and as brown parents, we're going to be so open. Because when you're having 16 or 17, you're definitely going to be experimenting. Like, we want to be there. We want to say, like, listen, like, do you have protection? Like, what's going on? Do you need to go on the pill? And I think that's so groundbreaking when I talk about this. They're like, you are brown. You can't really talk about this. You should tell your daughter not to have sex. And it's like, no, I'm never going to say that.
Obviously doesn't work.
It doesn't work.
You think that like that's the thing. Like, people think that like, because like you're telling me not to do something, I'm just not going to do it. Like, this is something that's so like primal of all of us. It's so inherent.
Yes.
It's like, you're asking me to turn something off that you couldn't even turn off at my age.
Literally. I mean, it's also like, sex education does also like delay sexual debut. So I grew up in a really like regressive household, and I only ended up having sex like at 21. And I started much later than most people. But that was because like my mom actually had conversations with me throughout. And I was consistently having conversations with my girlfriend. So I kind of like had an idea of what I was ready for. And I didn't have it until I was ready. Like at 21, I was like, I'm ready now. And I think like, especially if you have a child and you're kind of going through this, I'm not saying that, oh, my 16-year-old daughter in the future is going to have sex at 16. I'm saying that if she wants to try and experiment, I'm still going to help. I'm going to be there for her. Like if she gets pregnant, I don't want to be the parent that's like kicking her out on the curb. But on the other hand, like if I'm giving her the tools that she needs from much more earlier age, like to understand what it's going to be like, then she's going to make those decisions for herself. Like, it's not up to me to say, you should have sex, you can't have sex. But if I give her the tools and I say, like, this is how your body works, this is how consent works, this is what boundaries work, and this is how sex works, like, they are left to their own devices. And 9 times out of 10, they are delaying sex until they are ready.
And I think that, like, if, like, part of, like, because I've, like, thought about that, right? Like, what is going to be my approach if I have, like, a son or a daughter, right? Like, in terms of, like, how I approach sex.
Yeah.
But I'm, like, and it's going to sound, like, corny, right? But it's, like, there's a movie like 17 again with Zac Efron, where old Zac Efron is telling them, like, it's like, he's like in high school, he's like, no, like, sex is this like beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And it's like when I watched it when I was like younger, I like laughed, right? But now, like, with a little bit more age and a little bit more experience, I'm all like, damn, like, we really just like as a society took something that's so like actually magical in its own way and like reduced it to like the stupidest shit, like I'm blowing her back out, or like stupid shit like that. It's like,
I hate that.
It's like, damn, like we ruined one of the greatest things that we have as a society, as like a people. That's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like so much of our lives are based off of that for a reason.
Yeah.
But we've reduced it so heavily, like, because we think that the sexually liberating thing is that, oh, as a society, we're having more sex.
Yeah.
That's really not the actual sexual liberation that we want, right? It's like to have like real sex.
And so much about what you end up learning about yourself comes through sex or not having sex. Like a lot of like asexual people will realize, oh, I don't have a relationship with sex at all. Like I don't want to have sex. I'm not attracted to that person at all. That's amazing. You've literally just uncovered like a door to yourself. You've opened a new door and you've explored this new part of yourself. And when you have sex and you realize, oh, I'm polyamorous or I'm kinky and I'm into BDSM, that's beautiful. Like there's such a community out there and that's what you're interested in. I think, again, I love the way that you say that. It is such a disservice that when we don't allow ourselves to fully show up and experience those parts of ourselves. Like I sometimes think about my own parents, or I think about like my grandparents or people in that generation, and I'm like, I feel so lucky to be able to experience the full dimension of sex, to feel the full dimensions of my sexuality, to come out and say, I'm bisexual, like I kissed a girl and I really liked it, and I'm attracted to women, and what are my pronouns, and like, am I non-binary? Like, what is my gender identity? Like, what what sexual actions in bed turn me on. Like, am I into audio erotica? These are not things that I think that my mother ever thought about, right? Like, she was probably like told by her parents that she just needs to have sex so she can have children. And I think that that's as we are going on, and hopefully I think for the brown community, like, experiment. Like, it doesn't have to just be about sex. It can be so much more about like what works for you. What are your pronouns? Like, who are you attracted to? Who are you not attracted to? I think these are just so amazing things that you can do, because I think that's a life well spent.
No, for sure. I think it's like a tragedy that like I think about like our moms and our grandmothers, and I'm all like, damn, like at whatever age, you were probably just married off to some person that you may or may not have found attractive.
Yes.
And then, because like we always say, like this is like something that I like kind of hate. We always say like, oh, arranged marriages like actually work because this is the divorce percentages and whatever the fuck, right? But it's like, yeah, but like most of those people are not attracted to their partner, are probably not sexually fulfilled by their partner.
No.
Like just because they are able to build a family unit does not deem success in that. Because like they were robbed of like true intimacy. They were robbed of true pleasure. And it's like, oh, that is not a success. Just because they had kids and they were able to be married for 30 years, like, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
But it's like, she never got to experience like what a true orgasm felt like. He never got to experience what true emotional intimacy felt like.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a success?
Like, but to them, they, I think we think of sex as being like procreational, not recreational. And that the idea that when it's recreational, that it's bad. But again, like hopefully, I hope like this generation, that's why, I think I love all of my sex educator friends and sex coaches and sex therapists. And I feel like it's this new generation, right, of us that are like understanding what sex is, like having more open conversations. Like even on this podcast, I think that this will be so groundbreaking for someone who's brown, or like for a brown man to hear, to be like, oh my God, like they're actually talking about sex in this like new way that we don't usually hear about, right? It's usually a brown parents telling you, do not have sex until marriage, and then have sex, and you have to do it perfectly, and then you have to be pregnant, and then you have to raise a family. But it's like, no, there are alternative ways to explore your sexuality and your sexual identity and like who you are.
Yeah, no, and I like, this is like the hippie in me. I like look at like real sex, and I like really look at it as like a mind breaking thing.
It is.
Like I think that it like truly opens your eyes and mind to like a different like world.
You know,
like,
there are a lot of people that manifest during masturbation who are like, when you have sex, like you can open like a window to your soul, and it's like tantric sex is like a huge thing, and like it's there. Like,
I can see it, right? Because when we talk about like the concept of like an orgasm, right?
Yeah.
Like we've like even robbed that. It's like just like, oh, like I'm gonna get a nut, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, but no, like a real orgasm, like your mind, like I think this is like real science. So your mind just truly goes blank.
Literally. Oh
like
my God.
monks train for years and years and years to get to that point of nirvana.
Yeah.
Quote unquote, right? Where it's like, yo, my mind is empty. Right? And like like that in itself is like a powerful like
place
thing,
to be,
right?
yeah.
Like to truly feel like in moment. Because I always talk about like people like now the internet like talks about like, oh, being present and all of that.
Yeah.
There's no other thing that you should be more present for
than
in that moment. And that I think also helps your sexual life, right?
Yeah.
The being present and not thinking about anything else.
Yeah.
Like we talked about like how stress is probably not a libido killer. Yeah. Right? It's like, oh, it's because in that moment, you can't even focus in on the thing that you're trying to like do, right?
Exactly.
Like your mind is thinking about like, yo, I got to pay the car bill.
Oh, yeah.
Your mind is thinking about like, damn, I wonder what the kids are doing. Right? Like, it's like, oh, you haven't even gotten the chance to be in this moment.
Oh my God, mindfulness is so important, especially when it comes to sex. And also, this is a PSA. Men need to moan more. Like, men need to like communicate. Like, I'm not even kidding. Talking and moaning and making sounds and being so present, like touching and feeling and like bringing all of your senses into it can heighten the experience drastically. Because then you're not just like having sex and you're like silently like orgasming, and you're right, like they're so out of their own head. Like mindfulness, like connecting with your partner, laughing, talking. Like it can be so fun and magical, and like play music and, you know, get lube and you have toys. And there's just like, you can make a whole production out of it. And like, I hope that people do like moan, make noise, like play music, just fucking have fun. It's a fun thing.
It's unfortunate. It's like because like of again like the like I just need to get my nut off and that's gonna feel good.
Yeah.
You're like robbing yourself of like the entire experience, right?
Yeah.
Because let's just say like let's just say as like a guy you are quick on the trigger, right?
Yeah.
You could experience that
Yeah.
for a lot longer. Like if I told like 18-year-old you like, hey, you get to like
Do this for
touch
a lot longer.
boobs,
Yeah.
right? You'd be like, yay, boobs, right? But because you're so focused on getting your nut off,
Yeah.
you're just like, you can't even appreciate that.
No.
Like you can't even appreciate that moment of like, oh, I get to like touch
Literally.
those boobs. Like,
Yeah.
like it's, and I'm like, again, I hope like through like the work that like you're gonna continue to do,
Yeah.
that we're able to drive these conversations more so in like our community, because I think like our community, like when you look at what happens or how patriarchy even looks in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, it's an epidemic over there, right?
It really is.
And it's like kind of seeping into our same culture
Yeah.
here, right?
Yeah.
Like you would think that because we're growing up here, and you know what I'm saying?
No, it's like I think that we are just as sexually regressive here as anywhere else.
Yeah, and I think like I really, this is like a passionate subject for me, right? Like I do want to make sure that these conversations are being had, and I kind of just to ask you, right, in terms of like, how are you, obviously columnist, right? But how do we drive these conversations more openly, right? Like how do we bring more men to the table?
Yeah.
To have these conversations? Because I'm like trying to figure this out like live now too. I'm like, damn, like I would hope that this is like something that we can do going forward.
You know, if anyone is thinking about being an educator or like starting more of like, I think there are some YouTubers that are also kind of like doing this work, but I think definitely more conversations on the internet, because that's where everyone is going to learn these topics. And, you know, if there are any like men or even women out there that are like have focused like sex content or sexual health content for men, I think that's a really, really big deal, right? Like we can continue to call out comments. We should continue to kind of, and I think the other thing is like, I think big tech isn't doing us any favors. Like they aren't really getting rid of like misogynists on the internet, which is like a whole other conversation to be had, because a lot of the men are victims. They're falling victim to Andrew Tate, to all of these guys who are giving them really bad advice, because that's the community. So I think there needs to be like more communities for men that kind of like encourage these safe. There are a lot of communities for gay men, but I don't think there are a lot of communities for like straight men in general, like, and safe communities. I actually mean that, like safe communities where they can explore their sexuality in more of an emotional way and not so much of like from a violent, like cishet, like toxic masculinity kind of way. And just like having more conversations. I feel like it's slowly starting, but I do worry sometimes. I think like on the internet, especially, like we can see more misogyny. We can see a lot of like, there's a lot of like hatred happening. And so, yeah, I guess the only way is that, you know, we build more safe communities for men, and, you know, there's a lot more like education that's a little bit more pointed.
No, absolutely. Doc, I think we're wrapping up, but I end every pod with a segment called Call Your Shot, presented by Jungly.
Yeah.
I ask our guests to something personal, business, professional in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever timeline you're looking out at. So Doc, call your shot.
Wait, I don't understand.
Any goal, anything that you're going to make happen in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, something that you want to make happen, something you want to do.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Okay. So shoot my shot. Okay. Yeah. So I am building a digital platform that connects queer women to the education resources and the care that they need, and it's called Fluid Health. We are launching very soon, and so it's a platform. You can come there. We have peer support groups where you can learn more about your body. You can get the resources that you want, and then we'll connect you to providers, sex therapists, OBGYNs, NPs. And so really just trying to build like a holistic space for queer women.
I like that, building the community that you're talking about.
Yes.
No, I love that. Doc, appreciate you doing this.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This is just such a great podcast.
Absolutely. Yo, thank y'all for listening. Peace. We good?